I remember exactly how quiet the apartment felt that afternoon, like the whole world had paused just long enough for something to go wrong. It was a Thursday, late summer, the kind of humid, sticky heat that clings to your skin even with the AC blasting. I'd gotten home early from work, which almost never happened. My boss had cut the day short because of some system outage, and I didn't argue. I just grabbed my bag, said a quick goodbye to my coworkers, and drove back to the apartment I shared with my boyfriend, Tyler. We'd been together for almost 3 years, long enough that routines had settled in, long enough that things felt stable, maybe even predictable. Tyler worked construction, so he usually didn't get home until after 6, sometimes later. That left me alone most afternoons, which I didn't mind. I actually liked having those quiet hours to myself. When I walked in, everything looked normal. His boots by the door, the faint smell of his cologne still lingering in the hallway, the TV remote tossed on the couch like he'd left in a hurry that morning. Nothing felt off. Nothing gave me any warning. I remember dropping my keys in the bowl by the door, kicking off my heels, and just standing there for a second, enjoying the silence. No noise, no pressure, just me. I decided to take a shower, not even in a rushed way, just one of those slow, relaxing showers where you let the hot water run over you and wash the day off. I turned on some music from my phone, set it on the bathroom counter, and let it play through the small speaker. Something mellow, something soft. I didn't lock the front door. That detail has replayed in my head more times than I can count. Not because it was unusual, I didn't lock it all the time when I knew Tyler wasn't home, but because it turned out to matter more than I ever expected. The shower felt amazing, the kind that makes you forget everything else. Steam filling the room, water beating down on my shoulders, my mind drifting. I stayed in there longer than I planned. I wasn't thinking about anything serious, just random thoughts, half-formed ideas, the usual. When I finally turned the water off, the bathroom was fogged up completely. I stepped out, grabbed a towel, and dried off slowly. No rush, no reason to hurry. I wrapped the towel around my hair, then dropped it to the floor to grab lotion from the counter. That's when it happened. I heard the front door open. At first I froze, completely still. I didn't even breathe for a second. My brain tried to catch up with what my ears had just registered. The soft creak of the hinges, the subtle thud of the door closing. Tyler? It didn't make sense. It was too early for him to be home. But it had to be him, right? Who else would just walk in? I didn't call out immediately. I don't know why. Maybe because something felt off. Not dangerous, just unfamiliar. Like a small shift in something I couldn't quite name yet. I heard footsteps.
Not heavy like Tyler's usually were. His boots always made a distinct sound against the hardwood floor. These were quieter, lighter. My heart started pounding. I grabbed the edge of the counter, suddenly very aware that I wasn't wearing anything. The bathroom door was slightly open, just a crack, enough that I could see the edge of the hallway if I leaned the right way. "Tyler," I finally said, my voice sounding smaller than I expected. There was a pause, and then a voice answered. "Hey, oh." It wasn't Tyler. Everything inside me dropped at once, like an elevator cable snapping. I turned toward the door just as it pushed open wider. And there he was, Evan, Tyler's younger brother, standing in the doorway, frozen mid-step, his hand still on the knob, his eyes wide like he'd just walked into something he wasn't supposed to see, because he had. I wasn't wearing anything, not a towel, not clothes, nothing. For a split second, neither of us moved. It was like time glitched. My brain screamed at me to react, to cover myself, to say something, but my body lagged behind. His gaze flicked up and then immediately down, like he didn't know where to look. His face flushed red almost instantly. I thought, he started, then stopped. That snapped me back into motion. I grabbed the nearest towel and wrapped it around myself so fast I nearly lost my balance. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I came to grab something for Tyler," he said quickly, still not fully looking at me. "He asked me to swing by. I didn't know you were—" "Clearly," I cut him off. There was an awkward silence that stretched way too long. Evan had always been around. Family barbecues, holidays, random visits. He was younger than Tyler by 4 years, but they were close. Close enough that he had a spare key. close enough that showing up unannounced wasn't completely out of the ordinary. But this was different. He shifted his weight, still standing there like he didn't know if he should leave or explain himself more. I knocked, he added, almost defensively. No one answered. I was in the shower, I said, unnecessarily. Yeah, I figured. Another silence. I could feel my heart still racing, my skin still damp from the shower, the air in the room suddenly too thick to breathe properly. You should probably... I started. Yeah, he said, already backing up. He turned quickly and stepped out into the hallway. I heard his footsteps retreat, faster this time. Then the front door opened again, and a second later, it closed. And just like that, it was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet. I stood there for a long time, gripping the towel tighter than necessary, staring at the doorway like something might come back through it. My mind started replaying the moment on a loop. The look on his face, the way he froze, the way I froze, the fact that it even happened at all. It should have just been embarrassing.
A weird, awkward accident. Something you laugh off later, maybe tease about it at Thanksgiving when enough time has passed. But that's not how it felt. Something about it stuck under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. I finished getting dressed, but everything felt off. My hands moved on autopilot, jeans, a t-shirt, brushing my hair, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that moment. The way he looked at me. Not just shocked. There was something else there. Something quick, almost invisible, but real enough that I noticed it even in that split second. And that bothered me more than anything. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was overthinking it. Of course he looked. Anyone would. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. But the feeling didn't go away. When Tyler got home that evening, everything seemed normal. He kissed me like he always did, dropped his keys, complained about work. I almost didn't bring it up. Almost. Hey, I said casually, leaning against the kitchen counter. Evan stopped by earlier. Tyler didn't even look up from the fridge. Yeah, I told him to grab my drill. Did he find it? Yeah, I think so. That's good. That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity, no concern. I watched him for a second, waiting for something more, but it didn't come. He walked in while I was home, I added. Okay, Tyler said, grabbing a beer. He's got a key. I know. He didn't know I was here. Tyler shrugged. Yeah, well, you usually aren't. I hesitated. He walked in while I was in the bathroom, I said. That got his attention, but only barely. He glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. Okay, and? I stared at him. And I wasn't exactly dressed. There was a pause. Then Tyler let out a short laugh. Seriously? I'm serious. He shook his head, amused. Damn, poor guy. Poor guy? I repeated. Yeah, Tyler said, cracking open the beer. That's gotta be awkward as hell. That's all you're going to say about it? He looked at me like I was making a bigger deal out of it than necessary. What do you want me to say? It was an accident, not like he planned it. I crossed my arms, feeling something tighten in my chest. I know it was an accident, I said. It just felt weird. Tyler shrugged again, completely unfazed. It's not a big deal. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it should have ended there. But it didn't. Because that moment, the one where I stood there completely exposed and he walked in, didn't just pass and disappear. It stayed. And it changed something I didn't even realize was fragile. I told myself Tyler was right, that it wasn't a big deal, that it was just one of those awkward things that happens when people share space, when families are too comfortable with each other, when boundaries get a little blurry without anyone really noticing. I tried to move on from it the way he already had, but something about the way he brushed it off stuck with me more than the actual moment itself. Because I couldn't shake the feeling that if the roles were reversed, if it had been one of my friends walking in on Tyler like that, he wouldn't have laughed it off so easily. The next few days were normal on the surface. Work, dinner, TV. The same routines we'd been living in for years. Tyler didn't bring it up again, not once. It was like it never happened. But I kept thinking about it. Not constantly, not in some obsessive way, but it would creep back in at random moments. Folding laundry, sitting in traffic, brushing my teeth before bed. That split second when Evan stood in the doorway, frozen, caught between leaving and looking. And the worst part was, I wasn't just remembering it. I was analyzing it,
trying to figure out what I saw in his expression, trying to convince myself I imagined that flicker of something else behind the shock. Because it couldn't be real. Evan wasn't like that. At least, that's what I'd always believed. He was the easygoing one, the quieter brother, not as loud or outgoing as Tyler, but still friendly, still present. The kind of guy who helped set up chairs at family barbecues, who stayed late to clean up, who didn't make things complicated. We'd always gotten along fine. Nothing weird, nothing inappropriate, just normal. Until that moment. 3 days later, I saw him again. Tyler had invited a couple friends over to watch a game, and Evan showed up too. I didn't know he was coming until I heard his voice in the living room. My entire body tensed before I even realized why. I stayed in the kitchen for a minute longer than necessary, pretending to be busy with the snacks, listening. Tyler laughed at something. One of his friends said something loud and obnoxious, and then Evan's voice, quieter, but still clear enough that I could recognize it instantly. He sounded normal, completely normal. That almost made it worse. I took a breath, wiped my hands on a towel, and forced myself to walk out there like nothing had changed, because technically nothing had, right? When I stepped into the living room, Tyler was sprawled on the couch, already halfway into the game. His friends were on the chairs, drinks in hand, and Evan was leaning against the wall, a beer loosely held in his fingers. His eyes lifted the second I walked in, and for just a fraction of a second, everything else in the room disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. No one else would have noticed it. But I did. That same hesitation, that same flicker of recognition, like we were both remembering the exact same thing at the exact same time. Then it was gone. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Hey," he replied. Nothing else. No mention of what happened, no awkward apology, no joke to break the tension, just that. I moved around the room, handing out snacks, keeping myself occupied so I didn't have to stand still long enough to think too much. Tyler barely glanced at me, completely absorbed in the game. Everyone else was loud, focused, distracted, except Evan.
I could feel it without even looking directly at him, that awareness, like there was something unspoken sitting between us, invisible to everyone else. At one point, I caught him looking at me, not in a creepy or obvious way, not lingering, just there. A glance that lasted maybe a second too long before he looked away like he wasn't supposed to get caught. And my stomach tightened. I told myself I was imagining things again, but then it happened again and again. Nothing blatant, nothing you could call out without sounding crazy, but enough that I noticed, enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. By the time the game ended and people started leaving, I felt drained in a way I couldn't explain, like I'd been holding my breath for hours. Tyler walked his friends out, still laughing, still talking. I stayed behind, gathering empty bottles and plates, trying to shake off the weird energy clinging to me. I heard footsteps behind me. Not Tyler's. I didn't turn around right away. "Hey," Evan said. I froze for a second before looking over my shoulder. He was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't entirely sure he should even be there. "Hey," I said back. There was a pause. Then he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "About the other day," my heart jumped, even though I knew this was coming eventually. "It's fine," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. "Really? I didn't know you were home," he said. "I wouldn't have—" "I know," I cut in. "It wasn't your fault." Another pause, but he didn't leave. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about an apology. There was something else. "I knocked," he repeated, like he needed me to understand that detail specifically. "I believe you," I said softer this time. He nodded, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "I felt like an idiot," he admitted. That surprised me. I studied him for a second, trying to read what was actually going on under the surface. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "Yeah," he muttered, but it didn't sound like he believed it. The silence stretched again, but it didn't feel as awkward this time. It felt heavier, charged in a way I couldn't quite define. Then finally, he looked at me, really looked at me, and there it was again. That same thing I couldn't unsee. Not just embarrassment, not just awkwardness, something more complicated, something that shouldn't have been there,
I felt my chest tighten. "We're good," I said, breaking the moment before it could turn into something else. "Yeah," he said quickly, almost relieved. "Yeah, we're good." Tyler's voice echoed from the hallway, calling my name, asking where I left his phone charger. And just like that, the moment snapped. Evan stepped back, putting distance between us like it hadn't existed seconds ago. I should get going. Okay. He gave me one last glance, quick, controlled, and then turned and walked out. I stood there for a second longer, trying to steady myself.
Trying to convince myself that everything was still normal. But it wasn't. Because now it wasn't just a moment anymore. It was something we'd both acknowledged, something we'd both felt. And neither of us said it out loud. That night, lying next to Tyler, I stared at the ceiling long after he fell asleep. My mind kept circling back to the same thought. Not about what happened, but about what almost happened, and what it meant that I noticed. And worse, that part of me didn't want to forget it. I tried to ignore it. That was my first instinct. Bury it, minimize it, pretend it didn't exist. Because acknowledging it felt dangerous in a way I couldn't fully explain, like stepping onto ice that might crack under my weight. But ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it quieter. And sometimes, quiet things are the ones that get under your skin the deepest. A week went by, then another. Life didn't fall apart. Tyler and I didn't fight. There were no dramatic confrontations, no obvious signs that anything had shifted on the outside. If someone looked at us from the outside, we probably seemed exactly the same. But inside, something had changed. And it wasn't just because of Evan. It was because I couldn't stop noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way Tyler barely looked at me when he got home from work, too exhausted or distracted to really engage. The way our conversations had turned into routines. What's for dinner, what bills are due, what time he had to be up in the morning. The way intimacy had started to feel scheduled, almost, predictable, comfortable in a way that wasn't exciting anymore. None of that was new, but now I was seeing it differently. And I hated that, because it made me question things I hadn't questioned before. And right in the middle of all of that was Evan. He didn't show up for a while after that night. Not at the apartment, at least. Tyler mentioned him once or twice in passing, something about work, something about helping their dad with a project, but nothing that brought him physically back into my space. Part of me was relieved. The other part wasn't. That was the part I didn't want to admit to myself, the part that made me feel like I was already crossing a line just by thinking it. It happened on a Sunday. Tyler had left early to go help a friend move. He'd asked me to come along, but I said no. I told him I had errands, things to catch up on. That wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I just wanted to be alone. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, half paying attention to some show playing in the background, when my phone buzzed. I didn't think anything of it at first. Probably a spam call or one of my coworkers texting about something minor. But when I picked it up and looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. Evan. I just stared at his name for a second, like my brain needed extra time to process it. He had never texted me directly before. Not once. If he needed something, he went through Tyler. That's how it always worked. So why was he texting me now? I hesitated before opening it. It was short. Hey, is Tyler home? That was it. Simple, normal, innocent. Except it didn't feel innocent, because he didn't need to ask me that. He could have texted his brother. He always had. I typed a response, then erased it, then typed again. No, he's out. Why? I stared at the message for a second before hitting send, like I was waiting for some invisible line to appear in front of me. It didn't, so I sent it. The reply came almost immediately. Left something at the apartment the other day. Need to grab it. My chest tightened. You have a key, I typed back. There was a longer pause this time, long enough that I wondered if I'd said something wrong, or too pointed. Then, yeah, just didn't want to walk in again without checking. My heart skipped. That was the first time either of us had directly referenced it since that night.
even if it was subtle, even if it was wrapped in something practical. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how fast my pulse had picked up. "It's fine," I wrote. "I'm here." Another pause. Then, "Okay, I'll be there in like 10. I stared at the message after it came through, my fingers still wrapped around my phone. I could have said no. I could have told him to come back later when Tyler was home. That would have been the normal thing to do, the safe thing. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there for a few seconds longer, then set my phone down on the coffee table, like I hadn't just made a decision that mattered. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that he just needed to grab something, that I was overthinking it again. But my body didn't believe that, because as soon as I stood up, I became hyper-aware of everything. What I was wearing, just a loose tank top and shorts. Casual, normal. But suddenly it didn't feel neutral anymore. My hair, messy from sitting around all morning. The apartment, quiet, empty. Just me, and him, on his way over. I walked into the bathroom, glanced at my reflection, then looked away almost immediately. This was stupid. I was acting like this was something it wasn't. So I forced myself to stop overanalyzing, went back to the living room, and sat down again. I didn't turn the TV back on. The silence felt louder now. 10 minutes stretched longer than they should have. And then I heard it. The front door. This time, I was ready for it. Or at least I thought I was. He knocked first. That detail hit me harder than it should have. 3 quick taps, like he was making a point. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. There he was. Evan, looking exactly the same as always, and not the same at all. "Hey," he said. "Hey." For a second, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside, letting him in. He walked past me, careful not to get too close, like there was an invisible boundary now that hadn't been there before.
"I think I left my charger in Tyler's room," he said, already heading down the hallway. "Okay," I replied. I stayed in the living room while he went into the bedroom. I could hear him moving around, opening drawers, shifting things. It should have been quick, in and out, but he took longer than expected, and I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that he was in our bedroom, in our space, touching things that belonged to both of us. I crossed my arms, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of why everything suddenly felt so loaded. A minute later, he came back. "I found it," he said, holding up the charger like proof. "Good." He didn't leave right away. He just stood there, and I stayed where I was. The space between us felt smaller than it actually was. "Thanks," he added. "You didn't need to text me first," I said, before I could stop myself. The words came out sharper than I intended. His eyes flicked up to mine. "I know," he said quietly. "Then why did you?" There it was. The question I hadn't planned to ask, but now that it was out, I couldn't take it back. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, and then he said it. "Because I didn't want to just walk in on you again." My breath caught. The air shifted. This wasn't casual anymore. This wasn't just about a charger. "You could have texted Tyler," I said, even though my voice had softened. "I could have," he agreed. "But you didn't." "No." Silence. Heavy. Thick. Almost suffocating. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, in my chest, in my fingertips. "Why?" I asked. I don't know why I pushed it. Maybe because I already knew the answer. Or maybe because I needed to hear him say something that would shut all of this down. But that's not what happened. He took a step closer. Not enough to cross a line, but enough that I noticed. "I don't know," he said. That was worse than any clear answer he could have given, because it wasn't a denial. It wasn't an excuse. It was something unresolved, something real. And I felt it, standing there, in the quiet apartment, with no one else around, just the two of us, and everything we weren't saying. I should have walked away. I should have told him to leave. I should have ended it right there. But I didn't. I just stood there, and so did he. The silence stretched out in a way that felt almost physical, like something pressing against my chest. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, and underneath it all, my own heartbeat, loud and unsteady. Evan didn't move any closer after that one step, but he didn't move away either. He just looked at me.
Not like before. Not like those quick glances in the living room with everyone else around. This was different. There was nothing to hide behind now. No noise, no distractions, no one else in the apartment. Just us. "You should probably go," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I meant it. At least, I think I did. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I should." But he still didn't leave, and neither did I. That was the moment everything crossed from something accidental into something chosen. Because we both knew what we were doing by staying. I broke eye contact first, turning slightly like I was about to walk away, like I was giving him the signal to head for the door. But I didn't take a step, and when I felt him move again, it wasn't toward the exit. It was toward me. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate, careful. Like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't. My chest tightened as he came closer, the space between us shrinking until it wasn't really there anymore. I could feel the heat coming off him, the shift in the air, the way everything inside me was suddenly hyper-aware. "This is a bad idea," I said, but the words didn't carry any real force behind them. "I know," he replied. That should have been the end of it, two people acknowledging a line and choosing not to cross it. But instead it just hung there between us, like something neither of us intended to follow. I don't even remember who moved first. I just remember the moment our hands brushed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some big cinematic gesture. It was small, almost accidental. But it wasn't an accident. And the second it happened, everything shifted. I felt it instantly, that jolt of something sharp and electric that ran straight through me before I had time to think. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Neither did he. And then his hand closed around mine, gently, like he was still giving me a chance to stop this. I didn't. I looked up at him, really looked this time, and whatever hesitation had been there before, it was still there, but it wasn't enough. "Tell me to leave," he said quietly. My throat tightened. I knew that was my out, my chance to end it without anything happening that I couldn't take back. All I had to do was say it. Just 2 words. Leave. Now. But I couldn't. Because standing there, with his hand around mine, with everything we'd been circling around finally right in front of us, I didn't want it to stop. That realization hit me harder than anything else. Not what he was doing, not the situation, but the fact that I wanted it. "I should," I said instead. That was the closest I got. It wasn't enough. He exhaled, like he understood exactly what I wasn't saying. And then he let go of my hand. For a second, I thought that was it, that he'd made the decision for both of us. But then his hand moved again, not to grab mine this time, to touch my arm, lightly, just his fingers brushing my skin. And somehow, that felt even more intense, because it wasn't about stopping me anymore. It was about seeing if I would move away. I didn't. Everything inside me was screaming that this was wrong, that this was crossing a line I wouldn't be able to uncross, that this would change everything. But another part of me, louder, stronger in that moment, didn't care. It had been building for weeks, maybe longer if I was being honest with myself. That slow shift, that awareness, that feeling I kept trying to ignore, and now it was right here, real. I could end it, or I could let it happen. I turned my head slightly, like I was trying to gather my thoughts, like I was still deciding, but I already knew. And when I looked back at him, something in my expression must have given it away, because the hesitation in his eyes faded just enough, not completely, but enough. He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back slightly to keep looking at him, close enough that I could feel his breath. "This is a mistake," I said again, softer this time. "Yeah," he replied, and then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't aggressive. It was hesitant, like he was still expecting me to push him away at the last second. I didn't. And the moment it happened, everything else disappeared. The guilt, the logic, the consequences, all of it got drowned out by something immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't just physical. That's what surprised me the most. It felt intense, like something that had been building quietly under the surface had finally broken through. My hands moved before I could stop them, gripping his shirt, pulling him closer like I was afraid he'd pull away if I didn't. He didn't. If anything, he leaned into it, and for those few seconds, I let myself forget everything else. I let myself exist in that moment, even though I knew exactly what it meant, even though I knew I'd regret it, even though I knew there was no going back after this. Eventually, we both pulled away, not because we wanted to, because we had to. The reality of it came crashing back in all at once. I stepped back first, my breathing uneven, my heart racing in a way that felt completely out of control. "What are we doing?" I asked, more to myself than to him. He ran a hand through his hair, looking just as shaken. "I don't know," he admitted. That answer wasn't enough anymore, because now it wasn't just tension. It wasn't just looks or moments or things left unsaid. Now it was real. Now it was something we actually did. I turned away, pressing my hand against my forehead like I could somehow steady everything spinning in my head. "This can't happen again," I said. I needed to say it. I needed to hear it out loud, even if I didn't fully believe it. "Okay," he said, too quickly, too easily. I turned back to look at him. "You mean that?" I asked. He hesitated, and that was my answer, because I hesitated too, and we both knew it. That was the worst part. Not the kiss.
Not even the fact that it was Tyler's brother. It was the realization that neither of us was completely willing to stop. "I should go," he said finally. "Yeah." This time, he actually moved toward the door, and this time I didn't stop him. I just stood there, watching him leave, feeling like something inside me had shifted in a way I couldn't undo. The door closed, and I was alone again, but it didn't feel like it did before, because now the silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud, heavy, full of everything I had just done. I walked back to the couch and sat down slowly, my hands still slightly shaking. I kept replaying it in my head, every second of it, every decision I made that led to that point. I could still feel it, and that terrified me, because I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like it was a mistake I could easily regret and move past. I felt awake, and that scared me more than anything, because Tyler would be home in a few hours, and I had no idea how I was going to look at him the same way again. That night, lying next to Tyler, I stared into the dark, knowing I had already crossed a line that would never disappear, no matter how quiet I kept it. And the worst part was, I wasn't thinking about how to fix it. I was thinking about when it might happen again.